For the newly indoctrinated, Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files follows the story of a professional wizard in Chicago. We started our podcast as a way to help break down the series' most important moments, characters, and lore. This is McAnally's Dresden Files Pubcast by Free Flow Rambling. Conjure at it by your own risk. Welcome to the McAnally's Pubcast, brought to you by Free Flow Rambling. This is episode 8.9, A Dish Served Cold, where we are covering the novel Grave Peril. My name is Tansenn, and I'm joined by Maggie.
Hello, hello.
And Jess.
Hi.
Chapter 18. Dresden recovers from his attack while he and Bob analyze the dream. Bob informs Harry that the nightmare has eaten part of his powers and is stronger as a result. After some theorizing, Dresden realizes who the next victims might be.
So we left kind of the cliffhanger last time was he'd had this terrible nightmare where we discussed the horrible death of Mickey Malone in that dream. Murphy just kind of gets sliced and diced kind of quick, it's over. Michael just gets like his neck snapped kind of quick, and then Harry gets chomped at the end, and he's like literally freaking the fuck out and like runs down to his lab and like pulls up his circle to like shut everything out and protect himself and whimper and cry and hide.
His protective blankie.
Literally like his thanks to Mr. having clawed him basically. We find out that Bob had not yet, right? Because Harry, we just as we get into this, but yeah, Bob's basically is like was still in Mr. from his recon mission. And saw that Harry was, like, out of it. So he kind of stuck around to keep an eye on him and tried to. And he's like, yeah, I think I know what ate you. And that's kind of where we left off. So now we're at the start, and Harry's like, eat me? Like, what? I don't understand. He's like, yeah, this nightmare you've been chasing, yeah, totally just took a big chomp out of you. And Harry's like, what the fuck? So he gives us a nice excuse because Harry's all kind of, and I will admit, I mean, not usually like this terrified, but those are always the worst dreams for me. I dream a lot. I always have like weird dreams, and I remember most of them at least like for a little while once I wake up, right? So they're often kind of strange and slightly abnormal or whatever, but the worst ones are ones where I'm really emotionally invested in the dream, and I will wake up and I will be like really like if I started like having an argument or something in the dream, and I will wake up still like really tense and like frustrated, and I'm like, I know as soon as I wake up, I'm like, hey, I know it was a dream, but it'll still take me a while to, it's like, I think there's lots of jokes and stuff out there where it's like, like the wife or something is like, you're in big trouble, you're sleeping. He's like, what did I do? It's like, you didn't share your cupcake in my dream. And it's like, it's like, I know, but I'm still mad at you. And it's like, it seriously is like that. Or like ones where I would like literally wake up like crying because I'll be like so hugely emotional that it literally does transfer over to like the real world and stuff like that. So I'm like, I kind of do sympathize with Harry here. Like I said, I'm not usually, thank God, mortally terrified or anything like that, but I mean, I definitely have had bad dreams and definitely have had some scary ones, and those are, but it also gives us a nice moment here because it gives him an excuse to be like, I don't know what's on, and for Bob to give us like all this exposition that Harry doesn't necessarily need, but the readers do.
Right, yeah.
Right. So
Bob lets him know what happens from his end.
Yeah, so explains, he's like, do you remember coming in all, like, drunk off, like, vampire spit and everything? And he's like, kind of. So he fills Bob in on what happened to finding Lydia and getting jumped by Kyle and Kelly and all that kind of stuff. And then, so then Bob kind of goes back to his, and he's like, I think you were torn up pretty good or whatever. And he's like, I remember I had a dream. Like, he's like, it was a terrible dream. And he's like, I tried to change it, but I wasn't ready. I couldn't. And Bob's like, yeah, he's like, okay, like that figures or whatever. And Harry's like, what do you mean that figures? He's like, I think I realize how this is happening, right? So we find out, because they've been up until this point, right? They're like, how did this thing cross a threshold? Like, maybe it went into Lydia, and Lydia got an invite, and Bob's now like, no, like, this thing didn't come into you guys. You went out to Ed or whatever, so you went and had these dreams, right? Because we learned same thing, that Malone hadn't been sleeping, right? He'd been suffering from insomnia and stuff like that, so this thing is outside tearing up little kitty cats and birdies while it's waiting. And then once he finally goes to sleep, then he can access from the Never Never side or whatever. So the same thing with Harry, right? He's like, once Harry finally fell asleep and again, like normally, Harry does say like normally he has to be a little bit more prepared, like he can have sort of lucid dreams if he sort of knows or wants to do. But I think even in a general sense that because Harry's aware of it and it's something he can do, I think most times he would have an easier time manipulating his dreams. But this time he wasn't ready, and the added fact, I think, of being incapacitated by the vampires and things like that is what also made it. And then getting, like, not even just, like, sort of a bad dream he wanted to change, but it was a literal attack on him that, there was... Going on. Yeah, because it was, like, ordinarily, I think he probably... Because, we're a couple of days into this. Like, I think Harry has otherwise been sleepy. Like, he had the nightmare about Leah and stuff like that, but... Either this is the first time that the nightmare has specifically chosen to come after him, or just the first opportunity to get at Harry. And Bob also lays out that, because of people dreaming and stuff like that, right? And like, how the ghost is just an imprint of you left behind. And Harry's like, but I'm not a ghost. And he's like, but you have everything to make a ghost. Like, you're just a ghost waiting to happen. Like every person is, it's just until you die, maybe you are, right? And then, saying how not all dream, he's like, most of the time you dream it probably wouldn't, but sometimes when we have like these intense dreams that it makes these little pocket universes in the Never Never, like Agatha Hagglethorne's domain and things like that, right? And then Harry's kind of like, oh shit.
Unintentional though it was, there's no research like a Mythbusters episode.
There's a Mythbusters episode on dreams?
No, but I'm saying they made their own Mythbusters episode. They were like, well, how do we figure this out? Let's just do it ourselves. They didn't mean to, but if you really want to see how the nightmare's working, just have a nightmare.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. So he remembers that, the dream started out sort of normal. It started out the events that they happened on this actual real life bust that they did. But when it got to the part where they took down the bad guy, all of a sudden everything switched and the bad guy took down all of them. And I don't know why, it's so funny, my mental picture of this demon, like I know it sort of says in the dream, he's like, it was kind of like cloudy and misty and something like that, sort of foggy or something like that. But yet, by the time it gets around to the point where it's like chomping down, I almost always, mostly the,
Mario?
Maleficent. No, the dragon, in the Disney cartoon version, just sort of that silhouette black dragon that she becomes kind of, that's almost always more just sort of like the silhouette-y black, not a lot of like crazy detail out of like a D&D dragon or something, but just I always sort of pictured that. Just I think maybe because of the way it says it, like chomps them and grabs them and shakes them, but yeah. And then at other points it's like different things, but in that point I always envision this sort of dragony thing is coming after.
I think I still envision the toad demon for some reason.
Oh really? Is that like your default demon in like every Dresden now?
So far.
Okay, no offense, I like my dragon better than your toad demon.
I totally like that idea better. I'm hoping it'll replace mine.
Right? Like, no. But yeah, kind of like, almost like the way it's sometimes depicted, like that sort of two-dimensional sort of shadowy thing. Mm-hmm. But anyways. So then he's like, so what else happened? So that's when Harry figures out, and he's like, when stuff started going wrong, like I tried to change it, but I couldn't. And Bob's like, he's like, well, you're lucky and you're not. Like, it didn't manage to take as much out of you, like it got a bite of you, not killed you or did worse damage, because you were kind of on home turf. It was your dream. But because he got the drop on you and you weren't expecting it and you weren't at full capacity, he still managed to do damage to you that he might not otherwise have been able to do.
And Bob was able to help with the assistance of Mr.
And at least Bob. And again, that's so fun. Like, that's just an interesting little quirk there again on the spirit side, because I'm like, we all see each other dreaming, but we don't know what dreams are, right? But that Bob's like, I think I know what got you. Like, just because he's got that spirit element, almost like a little x-ray vision or something, like, whether the entity had kind of crossed over into that space or whether he could see into, right? But that's basically what it is. He's like, I saw this thing attacking you and tried to wake you up, right? And so, yeah, exactly. He's like just a little friendly, like, SWAT. Like, we've all been there, right? Who hasn't woken up to, like, a cat. Thank you, dear.
Please
that was for
feed me.
I was going to say, you started that sarcastically, but we all have.
Yeah.
So they next theorized that it could be a ghost demon, as the ghost was slayed by Amaracus, and therefore is possible that the demon is actually dead instead of dispersed.
Yeah, because he's like, can demons leave ghosts? And Bob's like, I don't think so. He's like, unless it was like, because that's something, and I don't know if it's been fully explored, if everybody who's only this far in the series gets it, but like with the toad demon and things like that, it's that they're manifesting, they're creating this, ectoplasmic body to be real in our world, because they're only real in the Never Never, right? And so when Harry kills something, it's usually just shattering that vessel. Yeah, the energies that are holding that together are, as you say, dispersed or whatever, and their, spirit, whatever, goes back to the Never Never. So they're not dead, they're just blotted out.
Vanquished.
It's like a reboot, right? Like, it's next character, and you've gone back to Little Wing, reboot. Mario, like, jumped off a cliff or something, but he'll be back in the next... So here, Bob is like, well, unless you, like, killed, but again, that's the whole point of, like, demons and entities like that, is that they're much harder to kill in our reality, and why they're scary and nightmarish and stuff like that, and because you have to kill them, like, 2 or 3 times to get to the, or again, kill them in their reality. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh yeah, well, Michael took him out with Amaracus, and he's like, ooh, yeah, that might have.
That'd do it.
Yeah, and you can tell just Bob's like, oh, and like, it's like, okay, so we know, again, it just emphasizing the fact that Amaracus is some serious stuff, and even compared to what some of Harry can do, right? Harry can, like, disperse shit, but even, what he's using at this time and how he's using it, he wouldn't necessarily have killed that. But Bob's like, yeah, no, Amaracus might have had enough. Like, that whole faith magic and whatever, like, that could have been enough to kill him. So, again, maybe it did leave, like, a ghostly imprint like other beings of this world can leave.
Yeah, Michael wields quite a bit of power.
Yeah, and it's the other part of what makes Michael so awesome is that he's not a douche.
No, he's not.
Like, he does have, and in some instances like this, he has more power than Harry, potentially, and yet he's even less of a dick than Harry can be sometimes. I love you, Harry, but...
A bit of a never-ending shtick with Harry, though, is that as main character as he is, he's never exactly, outclassing his allies.
Yeah, he's never like the, Superman of, where he's always right and always knows the right. And even right here, because he's like, they're like putting it together with Bianca and stuff like that, and her stirring it up, and Bob's just like, all right, well, go kill her. And he's like, I can't just go kill her. And Bob's like, he's like, you can't just kill her. And he's like, well, no, I can. That's why I said you. And he's like, no, like, I can't just. And Bob's like, why? And Harry's like, well, he's like, oh, it's this whole moral thing. He's like, yeah, I still get confused about that. And Harry's like, yeah, join the club or whatever. But again, right, in an instance like this, it's like, well, yeah, if I can't just walk around murdering people, but there's a lot of other moments where Harry's like, am I doing the right, like, even in the next chapter and stuff like that, he has some of those, like, well, I've done everything I can, haven't I? Like, do I have to do more? Like, can I just cut my losses? And
just interesting, because he's got such an over sense of responsibility.
Yeah. And that's
that he would even consider that he's got a skewed compass. And
I think that's, kind of what Harry, like, he's like, ultimately, I know, it is kind of that rhetorical question to himself, where it's like, do I really? And he's like, okay, ultimately, yeah, I know I am. Like, obviously I can't. And we know, 9 times out of 10 or whatever, like, yes, Harry's, but I mean, yeah, it's that whole that sometimes he wants to, he's like, I'm scared, I'm outclassed, I don't have any, like, like, I want to get the fuck out of here and live to fight another day kind of a thing. And yeah, he always, eventually, or ultimately, which is why we do like Harry, because we're like, we know you're the good guy, we know you're the hero, we'll know you, despite all your grouching and grumbling and pretending otherwise, but there are moments where it's not as black and white and cut and dried, and he's like, which is the right road to take,
Sometimes his weakest moments are when he's his own boss. Because typically speaking, when he's up against a power, he pretty much always chooses the fuck you version, right?
Yeah.
So people are telling him, step down, walk away, don't do this. It's very easy for him to be like, Oh, I'll do whatever the fuck I want. But as soon as he's the only, barrier against himself, that's when he really is like, I don't know. I
feel that. If I've got like a boss or something that's like, okay, we need like A, B, and C done, and like A's the priority, and then doesn't, and you're like, okay, okay, no problem. But as soon as they're like, oh, I don't know, we've got one. And then you're like, well, should I do this one first? Well, what about that one? Well, if I do this one, what is the, well, I don't, and I, you know, and it's like 20 minutes of like just thinking about it before I'm like, why don't you just do something?
You know that Lit song? My Own Worst Enemy?
Yeah, right? Like all the time.
Play that right now.
Or, yeah, little interjection here.
Harry's life.
Yep. So yeah, so they figured out that Bianca is stirring some of this up, and they figure that, yeah, it's this demon that's basically made a ghost, and now it's coming after all the people. So there were several people from SI.
I want to backtrack on that real quick because, like, this entire book thus far, like, Harry's been like, I don't like Bianca and she sucks, and there's been a little bit of vampire activity, but, like, thus far, he's been like, it could be this, it could be that, it could be that. In this moment, they're just both like, all right, fuck Bianca. She's definitely the one stirring shit up. It seemed like a little bit like...
Felt like a reach.
Well, yeah, it seemed like, you know, this whole time they're just like, she's on the table, and suddenly this chapter, like, it's Bianca,
but
for sure.
I think some of this is because Kyle and Kelly and stuff keep popping up, so we know the nightmare is after Linda, and they've now nabbed...
Lydia.
Who
the fuck is Linda?
I know, so I was like, that didn't feel right coming out of my mouth. Lydia. So I think that's where he's like, okay, well, she's definitely got to be involved now, because that's where... the connections and things, cause he's like, Bob is like, maybe the spells are someone else's work. And he's like, Bianca, I said suddenly, she and her lackeys are all messed up in this somehow. Remember that they put the snatch on Lydia? And they were waiting for me that first night when I came back from being arrested. So he's like, I didn't think she was, and Bob's like, I don't think she was that big a practitioner. And he's like, not horribly, but she just got promoted and blah, blah, blah. So I think this is where, like, I do kind of get what you're saying, but I think this is why it suddenly, you know, the reasoning in the book is like, well, Bianca keeps popping up and meddling, and like every time I want to go, like Kyle and Kelly are there, and I go looking for Lydia, and they've taken Lydia, and right, so I think that's where he's like, it's got to be.
I don't know, for whatever reason, the execution of those facts just still isn't enough for me.
Seemed a little too convenient or whatever.
I don't know. Just something about it was just like, I don't know. I don't know if I'd really be that confident at this point.
Yeah. What was the other one back in like the last book where Harry's just like, no, it's the first Stormfront with Weaselface. The photographer, Desi, whatever.
What about it?
And you were just like, Harry just instantly decides that you're like, you know, he's like, I'm just gonna take the film and it's all fine. And you were so mad about him just like making that snap decision about deciding like how dangerous or not he was.
I don't know, like,
you're like, he just fucking trusted him. What the fuck?
95% of the time, I enjoy Butcher, and I think that he does a really good job, like, backing Harry into corners. So, like, for the audience, it's like, it's not like, well, that's convenient. It's like, no, he literally had no other option but this. Yeah. But every now and again, Butcher really throws a bone, and I'm like, how dare you? Just don't be this nice to this guy.
I don't have 6 more chapters to figure out how to suddenly work. Just, it's Bianca, okay?
Yeah.
Just
every now and again, I'm like, whoa, you really rushed that, bitch.
There's just no pleasing her either. It drags out forever, and there's no resolution, or there is, and then it's just too soon. Man.
Normally, I'm one of those people, like, every movie I've ever watched is, like, the best movie I've ever seen. But really breaking it down to a podcast, I'm very critical now. I'm like, yeah,
wait a second.
You know what? I do have issues with everything, as a matter of fact.
Right? As does this ghost demon nightmare thing. So Harry starts putting it together. So he still can't figure out Lydia. So Bob's like, okay, well, yeah, she's kind of an oddball. Take her out. And he's like, okay, Mickey Malone and me and da-da-da-da-da-da. And he's like, we were all the people in this dream and everything. We were the ones that were right there. So while there was more SI people involved, it's really the ones that came down in those final moments that were directly responsible. So Malone had shot the feet out from under Kravos as Kravos tried to run away or whatever, so he was right there. Murphy was obviously right in there beside, you know, she took a swing at it. Dresden was the one that worked up the magic to trap Kravos in his circle and everything, and Michael's the one that took out the demon, right? So those are the big players right there, the ones that were in direct contact of making all that happen, not the other cops that were rounding up the other guys and working the perimeter and stuff like that, right? So Harry's like, oh shit, I got people in trouble now. Like, they've already hit up Malone, like,
Yeah, there's that hypersensitive responsibility that he's got again.
Yeah. Well, and he does, because I think, is that in this chapter he mentions?
Well, he realizes what happens is he realizes that the nightmare has taken his powers because he tries to use a spell that he's the flickin' bickus and he can't do it. Like it just fails him. And that's where they realize, oh, we got him right in the chi.
Yeah, I know. He's like, but yeah, so now he's like, well, this thing's out there running around with some of my power. If it does anything, I'm responsible. And Bob's kind of like, what? He's like, yeah, I know it, but it is. Like, not really, but it is still.
Sometimes I don't really, like, I'm not with Harry all the time on his responsibility, but for this one I actually am.
It's like,
this one I actually do blame Harry for. Like, the whole, like, you gotta protect your friends who are involved in this thing. Like, yeah, that actually, like, even without the nightmare taking his power, just whoever was there at that fight with Kravos, I can see, like, that's a fair thing for Harry to be like, I dragged these, well, I mean, it was kind of happening anyways, and the cops kind of enlisted Harry, but still, like, I still see that one, like, yeah, this is your team. You've got to, you know your team is being targeted, now you've got a sense of responsibility to keep them safe. That one makes sense. And then even furthermore, like, yeah, like, you didn't mean to give the nightmare your power, but it is running around with your face and power now, so yeah, like,
exactly.
Sometimes I'm not always like, Harry, it's not really your job, but for this one, actually, I'm like, yeah, you should figure this one out.
Yeah.
It really does seem like something you shouldn't put off.
Right, exactly. And I kind of love the realization of that or whatever, too, right? Because he's finally, getting over this nightmare, and the conversation has calmed him down, and he's not, like, literally scared out of his wits anymore. So, yeah, he wants to just, flick him Beckus, which is, I love that that's his. Again, that's just that. And eventually, I think they talk about it at one point of how he came about, and again, it's just his, blasé, flippant, sort of, like, but yeah, and he's totally, like, flabbergasted, like, blindsided, like, why? And Bob's like, oh, you didn't put enough power in it. And he's like, but I did as, like, I always, like, I've done it, like, 1,000,000 times. And Bob's like, 1,756 by my count, I think.
600.
1,756 that I've seen. But I just love that Bob's like, that records computer. He's like, yeah. So yeah, and then that's why he's like, probably because the nightmare took a big bite out of your powers. And Harry's like, say what?
The oh shit
He's
moment.
like, oh, did you miss that part?
It's the first thing I said, Harry, you idiot.
Yeah, kind of. Well, yes and no. Yeah, well, actually, yes, it is. He's like, I know it tried to eat you. But I guess Harry just took it as, like, an eat me dead thing, not a, like, eat some of my powers and leave me here and go away and be able to use that.
Right. And I love how vague Bob is about how long he may or may not have, like, the loss of his powers. He's like, it could be a day or two. It could be a couple of hours. Could be, a year.
Yeah, it's like a couple weeks.
Decades.
Months. Decades. But you'll be fine. And he's like, decades, Bob.
To be fair to Bob, decades is the same thing as a week.
Right. That's why Bob's like, yeah,
You're
Harry's
fine.
Like, yeah. Well, yeah, that's it. He's like, I'm responsible for what it does. And Bob's like, that's irrational. He's like, it doesn't make it any less true. Which is kind of, yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, kind of what Jessica was saying there. It's like, it is kind of irrational, but at the same time, it is also kind of... Because, yeah, like you said, to go back to that, it was like S.I. brought him in because he'd been doing all, like, these serial killings and stuff like that in order to... But, like you say, at the end of the day, while Harry's there, it's something from his side of the street. You know what I mean? Is he's put it sometimes. So exactly that's where he has. The whole point is that they wouldn't have. If Harry hadn't been there, they would not have been able... And Michael and whatever, but the demon and the sorcerer, so...
Even if Harry hasn't either A, announced it, or B, self-actualized it yet, he really does take up the whole, like, protector of Chicago, like, I'm in charge of the supernatural, and the cops take care of the regular shit, and, like, that's, like, I've got no choice. I'm that part of the team, like...
Yeah.
I'm the law enforcement here when it comes to the supernatural, so whether or not he's taken quite the same, words against it, he very much is, like...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's living that even if he hasn't.
Well, exactly, yeah. Well, he is, responsible for it. In a sense, not just like, it's stupid to make yourself responsible for things that really have nothing to do with you, but to a point where, like, he kind of is at this point. Like, he's really built himself up in this position.
And in this case, who is going to, like he says, there's not exactly, wizards running around all over town that, like, there's already, like, a wizard cop. He should be looking after... it's like there isn't anyone else, right? It's like... Yeah. So it's not even like he can kind of slough it off on somebody like, it's not mine. He's like, there's literally no one else. Even whether I want it to be or not, it does have to be me, right?
To be fair, according to his ads in the paper, I mean, he basically, he's declared himself a wizard cop, and not only that, but the only wizard cop.
Well, except that he didn't start out as a wizard cop. It was, private investigator.
He needed a private investigator.
Yeah, but his ad is like lost things found, paranormal investigations, no parties and love potions. That is not, he's not even being like,
still though, he's
I'll
not just
spy
like,
on your wife for you. Like, he's not even advertising sort of that part of the. It just very quickly became.
But, when your number one contract is the cops.
Yeah, so see, that's Murphy's fault right there. Harry didn't ask to be contracted by them.
Right. It's all Murphy's fault.
To be fair, I should have just let that troll eat her, and I would have, so many less problems.
They're also, almost his entire paycheck, so...
I know, but he wouldn't have been called in on the Madison murders. He wouldn't have been called in on the Lobo killings. He wouldn't have been called in for Cravo. See how it's all Murphy's fault.
One of the problems in Chicago, I don't think this is much of a spoiler, but they're on ley lines there. A bunch of ley lines cross over in Chicago, which is why they get a heavy sense of monsters more than other cities do.
It's like Sunnydale's Hellmouth.
Right.
We gotta have an excuse for why shit keeps happening here.
Yeah, but another point of it is, you kind of wonder, too, is, every other cop is just getting eaten by monsters all the time because they don't have a Harry in their city. And then you're a little bit it's a little less often because, Chicago's got the underground, which is good for monster hiding, and, they've got a bunch of ley lines, which is good for monster attracting, and, the Avengers have got New York covered, so they're fine. Monsters aren't, setting up their alien attacks over there.
Yeah, exactly.
But really, it's there's a certain extent of your, if Harry's not doing it, who's gonna? It's apparently the rest of the world is just dying, because it's been well established, too, that the other wizards are not our problem.
Right. Although, something he does kind of butcher establishes in the first couple of books before, we sort of find out about the ley lines in and of themselves and stuff like that, is he does often compare, because in the real world, Chicago is, an international hub, right? There is a lot of, he always compares it to, the air traffic coming in and out, and it is, port cities and things so, I mean, that's also kind of how, New York and LA and Chicago, it's just, it is a big, busy city. So as much as it's attracting, people from all over the world to come in and out on a daily basis, that naturally
good old tourist
also
monsters.
does. Exactly, it gives out a lot of, wow, there's a whole lot of people there to go eat. I'm going to go check out Chicago. But
Disneyland for monsters.
Pretty much, right? And
Smorgasbord.
Right.
Mommy says when I'm not afraid to ride all the rides, I can go to Chicago and terrorize all the people.
Yeah, pretty much. So, so they get that sorted out, that he's fuck, I've had a bunch taken out of me, and then he's figures out that, why and how it's going to go specifically, it's not going to go terrorize, Nurse Judy down at...
Yes, because of the bailiwick.
His bailiwick, which I love. I'm again, I think that's just a thrown in for the readers. People go look up a bailiwick if you don't know what it is.
It's just a fun word to say. Anyway.
It is too. I feel like it's more, again, one of those, more like a UK British term that we don't use bailiwick here as often, but I feel like there it's still maybe a little bit more. But yeah, your strong suit, your comfort zone, your... Wheelhouse. Yeah, exactly. So he suddenly, he compares it to Agatha and she's got power over babies and, abusive husbands and stuff like this. So he's well, fuck, that means this nightmare is going to have power over the ones that were immediately, and he's shit, it's after payback. I got to go find Murphy.
Right.
Dun, dun, dun.
At first I wasn't, I was why, what about Michael? Then it gets to the next chapter. I'm oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's that chivalrous streak. Gotta go save the girl first. And Murphy be fuck you. Yeah. But she's not here to hear him say it, so.
Thank you so much to our Patreon subscribers for your generous support. It's people like you who help us keep doing what we're doing. If you're not yet a Patreon subscriber, sign up today and get a fuck ton of bonus content, kick-ass merch, behind-the-scenes outtakes, and more. Sign up today at patreon.com/freeflowrambling.
Dresden calls Murphy to warn her, but finds out somebody has already called pretending to be him. He rushes to the police department, but finds he's already too late. The nightmare has already attacked Murphy. Dresden does what he can to make her safe and comfortable.
So like you said, he very, the start of the next chapter, he basically identifies that Murphy and Michael, but he's like, Michael's, got a better chance of defending himself. He's like, hell,
He's got a
potentially
big
even more
sword.
than me, considering how things went down. So he's like, I gotta check it on Murphy first. And I remember actually, like, when I read this the first time, I was like, Harry, you're being so fucking stupid. Like, I picked up immediately on, like, what Murphy was saying, because, like, for half a second, where he's just like, she's like, oh, you'll be late. And he's like, what? No. And she's like, I don't appreciate this. She's like, I haven't slept and you told me you'd be. And I'm like, oh, obviously. And Harry's like, what? No, I didn't. I told you. And it was just like, I feel like you're being too dense here, Harry. Like you got to Bianca too quick. Here you're being too dumb. Like, you should have been like... But yeah, and again, typical Murphy sort of digging her own grave. Because again, instead of just... And I get, like, she says, she's like, I haven't been sleeping. I'm tired. I'm cranky. But again, she doesn't, she just assumes he's being a dickhead or whatever and is like, stop being an idiot and hangs up instead of being like, why are you confused? Like, how come you don't remember you talked to me 5 minutes ago? And he'd be like, yo, I didn't. Don't, what I, like, right? Mm-hmm. It's just, and I mean, yes, you need it for the plot to work and yada yada. But again, it's just like, Murphy, just chill for a second. But it's kind of interesting, I realized as we're getting to this chapter, that this is really only the second time that we've seen Murphy this book. So again, she was the impetus in Stormfront. She hired him to check out this murder, and one case bled into the other case, and it all became one, but Murphy brought him in Full Moon. It was the same thing, right? It was Murphy comes in and gets him to start looking or asking him questions. She's like, yeah, she couldn't officially hire him at the time, but she basically brings him into the Lobo murders, and he discovers this whole big ginormous plot with 67 different werewolves all trying to get in on the action. In this one, we haven't yet. The only time he's seen her is when he gets called away from what him and Michael are doing to be asked to go check on Malone. And again, then sort of, at this point he's now, but this is it. This is only the next time we've seen Murphy. It's like normally he'll, call her for information, or she'll be coming to him, or, and there's no bigger case. Like, again, that was all off screen. That was Kravos that happened a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. And now this is like the in-between time where, so it's like, it's kind of, it's like Murphy is not as... Right.
Well, and this Grief Peril sets up the new normal for the series too.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this isn't like a buddy cop, film where what is it, like another cop TV drama, where it's just like, ooh, but this one has a supernatural element, like if you've watched Lucifer on Netflix, right?
Sorry, I haven't yet. I know.
What?
I know.
It's so good.
It's real good.
I know.
The point is like when I first started seeing commercials for that, I was actually annoyed because it's like you've got NCIS and you've got CSI and you've got NCIS A B C D E F G and CSI A B C D E F G and there's Law and Order A B C D whatever and there's like.
Yeah, any number of...
I don't know. Blue cop, red fish. There's a lot. There's
one cop, two cop, red cop, blue cop.
I cannot stand here, but there's a fucking...
It's been done.
Every word in the English language has been turned into a cop show at some point.
Yeah.
Every actor in the world has done a pilot episode.
Are there like 7 FBI shows too, or something?
Oh yeah,
they're all just called FBI.
It's never ending, right? And even if you go to Bones, where it's like it's more the medical side of things, but you still got the FBI every single episode.
Yeah, it
right?
still was always a case to solve. Yeah.
So it's like even the Dresden TV show, which I haven't seen the entirety of it, but typically speaking, that was another. It was kind of just set up as like it's a cop show with a supernatural.
So,
yeah, exactly, right. But it's like, Grave Peril really sets it up a new normal now where it's like, no, this isn't just like the cops and supernatural. This is like, no, Harry's always doing a supernatural thing.
Harry's the center. Yeah,
and he happens to know a cop.
Exactly, yeah. Murphy is not the center of it. It's not him coming in on a case every week.
And it changes a little bit from the passive to active as well because it's like, well, even like, when Harry starts to build up this whole like, I'm a person, I'm a protector, the Chicago's mine, this is my domain, I'm in charge of the supernatural here in this area. That's really like a good part of the like separating himself from just being like the cop's, psychic, He's actually his own person, he's got his own shit going on that's completely separate from the cops, but with his relationship to Murphy, he does get to make those calls in and be like, yo, background check this person, get my car at a compound, show up with your gun.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's
She becomes a bit of a tool in the toolbox, for lack of a better...
Well, a little bit, yeah.
Instead
I
of
mean, like you say,
the main catalyst.
in the first couple, it was like Murphy's like, I've got a case, you come help me. And then it starts being like, no, this is Harry's world and Harry's problems. And he's like, you come help me.
You come help me now, yeah.
Sometimes she's like, hey, do you have time to stop doing your thing to come and help me with, you know what I mean? But yeah, like you say, right, like he didn't, like you were just saying, like he started out as like a supernatural cop. And it's like, well, it wasn't really. He was like a private investigator of the very minimal sort of, like he wasn't looking for the juicy tabloid cases of, right, it was basically, he's like, I don't know, you lose your wedding ring or like your keys, or you think you got a ghost in the attic, like I can track that down for you. You know, he didn't start out looking at
That almost seems like Harry was really doubting his own power, or at least just wasn't aware of it necessarily, like, because like he kind of has always said, he's like, I've got a big bunch of mojo, but I'm not very like delicate with it. But even then, selling himself short, I'm like, I don't know, I can track down wedding rings seems a little bit like, come on, dude. Like,
well, I guess, and this is where we could make the argument
that bar
again
a
of
little
him.
low.
Well, but again, this is where we could say he was 20. Like, didn't we say he was about 20, 22 when he hung out his shingle, right? So he's just come off a rocky childhood of murdering mentors and almost being murdered and being like,
as
so
you do.
You got this power. Don't fuck it up. Like, would you be like out there blasting fireballs?
Fair enough.
And
Doom of
then-
Damocles
and
always hanging over that head.
Right, and that was a very real thing in the first book still, right? Very literal. And then he'd just come off of his apprenticeship with Nick, which again is where we saw Ragged Angel in Restoration of Faith. And that was probably like a really good learning experience. But again, with me knowing like how much I like kids, that would be like a really hard thing for me. You know, if you're out there looking for kidnapped kids, you know, missing kids, trouble, like, you know, I'm like, that's gonna, you know, like that would be, I'm like, I don't know if that's what I want to jump both feet in. Maybe I'll just go find some wedding rings for a bit until I feel like I really know what I'm doing here before I start taking, right? Because he doesn't have Nick to hold him by the hand and lead him through it anymore, right? So I think there could be a bit of a balance there that he might not have been looking to.
Growth period.
Yeah, like I've gotta, but what do I do with it? Yeah, how do I make it work? What I'm like, I don't know.
I'm just thinking it's real convenient that for Butcher that Harry lost his Doom of Damocles in that first book. So otherwise this would be a much more boring series.
It would, and I think it is
Really lucky for Butcher there.
I think
He got rid of that quick.
Yeah, right.
Seemed like a good idea.
Good thinking there, Jim.
Can't imagine what this series would be like if Harry was always like, oh.
That was a close call.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunate. Anyways, yeah. So yeah, we haven't seen Murphy.
Well, okay, no, real quick to add on to my comment. Typically speaking, when I read a book series, is like typically you understand, like, you know, this world is already happening, and the author has just decided to talk about it.
Do you, though?
Yes.
Because you basically say every time you read a book, you have no idea what's going on. You didn't understand the book as soon as you put it down.
No. But the world is still happening regardless of whether or not I understand it.
Okay, yeah.
But, like, the world is still happening, and so the author walks up to this world and sees it, and he's like, all right, I'm going to write about this world, right?
Yeah.
And then he has to pick the most interesting character to follow, right?
Right.
Or, you know, certain authors might pick, you know, 30 different characters if you're fucking goddamn George R.R. Martin.
Right.
Completely unnecessary. But typically speaking,
Right.
you walk up, you look at one world, and you're like, all right, something's, you know, like one of these guys is going to tell the majority of this world better than anyone else,
One of these
right?
guys is not like the other ones? One of these guys just isn't the same?
Well, so things are still constantly happening to the other characters, and things are always happening, right? But the author can only focus on one.
It's
so,
mostly through the filter
right.
of
So it wasn't necessarily like it's not Dresden's world and we're all just living in it, but the author had to focus on one of the guys, and like Dresden had a lot going on around him. He was the most interesting one to, you know,
Right.
do the day to day or the weekend to weekend, right? But so, you know, in that sense, you know, like, yeah, it was really smart. It was really lucky of Butcher that those Doom of Damocles ended when it did, because if he'd started writing his book a decade earlier, it might have been a little boring
Boy,
between
that-
16 to 26 when he wasn't allowed to, like, do any big magic, you know?
Right, no kidding.
Shit was kind of boring then. Just, what was it? Fucking Magic Carpet's failure.
And diet potion.
For really short
and
stories.
beard potion.
You know, like those flip books, right? But it'd just be like a really like short story, just like 2 sentences each about like the 10-year of his like failure.
Like, this is Harry, see Harry go boom. This is Harry, see Harry go boom. This is Harry, see Harry go boom.
A real quick poem about Harry Dresden.
I feel like we should come up with a haiku or something and put it on the... I'm not as good as I don't remember the thing, so I can't come up with a haiku.
575.
Yeah, I know, but I just...
What do you mean you can't remember it? I just told you that.
I said I'm not going to come up with one like on the spot but yeah, I feel like now we need to have like some Dresden poems or something.
That the gauntlet has been put
Okay,
out there.
fans, yeah.
Time for poetry.
And you will be judged, so make it good. So we're back at Murphy. By the time he gets off the call, he realizes that, okay, she thinks she already talked to me. I know she didn't talk to me. Ergo,
There is an impersonator.
this thing's trying to be me. And he does throw it out there. He's like, okay, there are a lot of things that can impersonate. So he's like, there's a possibility that something else has popped up, but doesn't seem real, like, Occam's razor kind of a
What are the
thing.
chances in this moment that it's going to be something else that's random?
Yeah, exactly. So he's like, this thing took a bite of me, so now it's familiar enough with me that it can look, walk like me, talk like me, da-da-da. So he's like, oh shit. So he goes tearing around to grab, what he thinks he'll need, and goes whipping down to the... And I love how he's got, like, his Scooby-Doo lunchbox. Like, so very... Like, my little, like, to-go exorcism bag. It's like, my Scooby-Doo lunchbox. Let me just throw some sand and candles and whatever in here. So, yeah, and he does, like, again, he's already basically said, like, I think Michael's okay, but he's like...
He does try to give him a call.
Yeah, exactly, right? He's like, no, and then, yeah, can't get through to Michael either, right? So he's like, fuck, and takes off. So... Thankfully, he does manage to make pretty good time, because now he knows he needs to hurry, and it's late enough that at least there's not. And I love this little exchange, right? He goes running into the precinct, and he's like, which way did I go? And the desk sergeant is like, what? He's like, did they come in here a minute ago? And he's like, checks the book, and he's like, yeah, you just went up to see Murphy. He's like, great, I need to see her again. I was like, that is just a little bit of that slapstick, I don't know, Keystone Cops sort of, like, innuendo or the other. It's like, which way did I go? I'm like, what?
As if they didn't think he was weird enough.
Yeah, right. I know. Well, he does too. And he's like the desk sergeant's like, what's going on? He's like, believe me, as soon as I find out, I'll let you know. It's almost a little bit surprising. Like, it's a good thing you are well enough known around there at this point, because yeah, otherwise I'd be like, yeah, I'm just gonna not buzz you in, crazy person.
Also, does the police precinct not ask for ID?
I was gonna say,
Because I was like, the dude has Harry's face, but not, like, his police badge.
I was gonna say, I swear, like, there's other times where Harry's had to, like, sign in or, like, show his, maybe this is like,
The last time we made Harry sign in, he put a hole in our wall.
Okay, technically he came in under arrest that time, so I don't think he had to sign in the same way. But I was gonna
I'm talking about when he was a janitor and he had to sign to go into the stuff.
Yeah, that was in full moon.
He wasn't arrested. He was a janitor.
Oh, okay. Well, then he still wasn't signing in. But
He
okay,
was.
Yeah.
But not his name.
Yeah. So he goes racing up to Murphy's office and throws Rudolph and Stallings for a loop, because they're like, aren't you already, what? And he's like, no time. And he's like, where's Murphy? In her office with you? And I like how he doesn't bother. He doesn't knock. He doesn't try the door. Like, he doesn't even try the doorknob.
He just kicks it in.
He just fucking boots. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe his hands were full. Like, he did say he was fumbling with, like, his staff and rod and lunchbox. And maybe that was the only reason he just didn't have a hand. But yeah, he just fucking boots the thing in. And gets taken aback, even though, like, he was expecting to see something. Was not expecting to see this thing with his fingers, like, inside Murphy's head.
Right, that would trip me out
That
quite
was,
a bit if I saw myself. And,
He's like, what the... So he gets a bit thrown, but I always wonder about this. Because I'm like, Parent Trap, and, like, this, where they're always like, hey, that's me. And I'm like... Honestly, would I do that? Like, you only see yourself every so often when you look in a mirror to do it, but the majority of your day, your life, I'm very, like, for this couple hours we spend together, I spend it all looking at Tansenn's face and looking at Jessica's face. I'm not looking at my own face. So I feel I know their faces really well. And yeah, if you were to walk by on the street, I'd be like, hey, is that Tansenn? I think that looks like... But I'm like, I always wonder this. I'm like, would I look at somebody and be like, wow, that looks exactly like me? Like, do you ever think about that? I can think about it all the time when they have, like, movies and stuff like this, or, like, where some, like, Supernatural, where something steals its face, or, like, Parent Trap, where it's, like, you've been separated, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, like, my brain just, I just think that'd be so trippy.
From a generation that is taking nonstop selfies all day, every day, I really think I would.
Maybe you would. Maybe.
I look at my face more than any other face in the world, I think.
okay, fair enough. Maybe that's,
But Harry doesn't have any mirrors in his house.
Harry doesn't have any at all.
So he's even less.
Supposedly. Although that is something I would like to, I can't remember if it's in this book or the other one.
Yeah, he shaves.
I know there is, he makes, he brings it up, where he's like, I don't have any mirrors in the house because they can be used as portals and things and come get you. And
First book.
Yeah, but then there's also, 2 scenes later where he, goes and takes a shower and, he's like, I was looking at myself in the mirror and I look like shit. And I'm like, that mirror you don't have, Harry?
That mirror was all fogged up with the steam from the cold shower.
Yeah. He's actually just got a metal plate that's, tacked to the wall.
I don't know, but it's still reflective, so...
I don't know what movie it's in.
Error.
I don't know what movie it's in, but, they, for the exact same reason, but they just keep a blanket over it, so it's good. So maybe Harry just does that. There's always a towel in front of the mirror unless he needs it.
And I sort of thought of that to, flip it around or have it, but I was like, technically, Harry, you say you don't keep them around. And then you got out of the shower and looked in the mirror. So. But it was literally, in the same, not even
That's just his identical twin that follows him everywhere and doesn't say anything.
Yeah, it's his Mary Poppins, twin person.
Yeah.
Anyways, so yeah, I don't know. Do you think you would recognize yourself if somebody looked that much and something was wrong? Do you think
I would not be expecting to see myself, so I'd probably be in giant denial that I'm looking at myself.
Yeah, see, I think it would be like that too. I was like...
You know, it's estimated there's 7 people on the planet who look like you.
Yeah, but it's not very... I mean, we've heard the doppelgangers and your twins and this and that, I know, but there are definitely, but it's just, again, in the media or whatever, when they come up with this stuff, everybody's like, that's me. How is... And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, by all means, if you can engineer to get somebody that looks almost exactly like me to
I can't
randomly
give it up right now.
Run into me on the street
happening.
Somewhere, but I always, I'll
keep my eyes open.
I know, right? I was like, would I look at that and be like, that's me? Because I'm like, again, I know what you look like with your hair up or your hair down or your hair long or your hair short, but I'm like, I just feel like it'd be so weird. If they didn't look identical to the way I looked at that moment. I just feel like my brain would just not process. Oh, you remind me of someone, but you're like there's some actress or something. I don't know. Anyways, I just always find that a really interesting concept. So yeah, so he takes a second to just stare in the sheer weirdness of seeing himself and seeing his fingers stuck in, and he's like, "Get the hell off her!" And then the nightmare's like, "Oh, you showed up." But he's all weird. Be thou silent, wizard.
Oh, yeah, using archaic language.
Yeah. I will tear thee apart. So, yeah.
Yeah, Nightmare Dresden uses Dresden's own magic against him. Here's a little salt on that wound.
Right? Right? So he does manage to get him to, sort of leave her alone or whatever in the moment, but he's all like, you forgot something. I'm you now. And, yeah, blasts him with his own, Ventus, the smaller wind spell. Ventus Servitas. And, again, semi-comical as to this whole thing of, which room am I in? He's, blows him backward into Stallings and Rudolph. Right. So they're all just in a big jumbled up pile on the floor, and he just, do and walks by, and Harry's like, fuck her, I can fucking hear this guy just, strolling out of here. But we're all, flailing and, a little bit stunned, a little bit jumbled in each other, and... It's like, what the fuck, right? So now Rudolph and Stallings are like, with the what? With the two of, huh? And this is where I start wondering a little bit about, because, yeah, he says it's gonna, got him alone, and Rudolph says he's gonna call downstairs and tell him not to let him out. And he's like, I didn't bother correcting him, he could just walk through walls if he wanted. Mm-hmm. So this brings up an interesting point to me. So when he's figuring out what it was... and realizes it's the same thing as Malone, right? So he's like, ooh, Malone wasn't sleeping. So while they were waiting for him to fall asleep, he's outside the house, trashing the place, was trying to get into Lydia because Lydia didn't want to sleep that night and made Fort Hill stay up all night, talking. And then he was praying over her and stuff like that. But she didn't sleep that night and it trashed everything outside the church. So, but as we find out here, it went to Harry's dream, so that was when Harry went to the Never Never in his dream, then the thing. So does it have a sense it's in the real world? Because when he shows up to Michael's like, well, oh, we're not there yet. But how often does it just bounce back and forth? Because back in book 1 or whatever, when he first introduces thresholds and stuff like that, he's like, that's why vampires don't try and mess around and cross a threshold uninvited, because it just takes everything they've got to hold themselves together outside of the Never Never and keep a body in the real world. So I was like, so is he just like he's in a body, but he's just gonna zap back to the Never Never, and then he's gonna, because the whole thing, it sounded like it's like takes a lot of like control and energy to whip yourself up.
Right, but he also has
This physical
Dresden's
body.
power now at this point.
I guess, but I mean, like I say, Dresden talks about being a brawler, but a lot of like he's not just jumping back. I mean, every time he fucking does something, he's like, "Okay, I'm exhausted for the rest of the book now." So I'm like, I don't know how often Harry would be like jumping back and forth between. I mean, like,
To be fair, they're just getting out of bed. I'm like, okay, that's it. I can't do anything else today. I'm done.
right? But I just, it was one of those things where I'm just like, I don't know if this holds water for me, because if he can just zap through the wall, then he's not that solid. And if he's not that solid, then how is he doing? I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's analyzing too much, but I'm just like, again, this is one of those little things. I'm like, are there holes in the plot? Are there cracks in this foundation here? Or
I did wonder how easy it was for him to...
yeah, because it doesn't seem like he shouldn't just be able to pop and be like, real world, not real world, real world, not real world. Because, I mean, like I said, Harry uses a bunch of power when he, like, tears open a rift to cross over, and Harry's not having to create. He gets to take his own body with him.
So it's a
forth,
part of the
but-
Never Never, though. It could just be easier for him.
Yeah, I don't know. He spends all his time running around in the real world until they fall asleep, and then he's just bouncing home until it's time to reset again or whatever. So I guess maybe he's not, like, coming back 2 or 3 times in the same night or something. I don't know.
I don't know.
Anyways, he's like, whatever, the nightmare could walk through walls if it needed to, and I was like, could it though?
I've never biopsied a ghost before.
Because this is true, and at the same time, though, then it was like, why would the ghost need to call up Murphy? It could just, like, walk onto the floor of her.
Yeah, that part was weirdo to me, because, like, I don't know why I would, like, set a meeting with Murphy if I was a nightmare. I would have just shown up and been like, what up, buzz me up, bitch. Gotta talk to Murphy. Like, that
Yeah.
part was weirder, but I think it's just a little bit for, like, you know. In a
plot-
book, it
to
was-
tip off Harry, because, he's like,
Yeah.
you already talked to me. No, I didn't. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
In a movie, I think it would have played out even more dramatic, but in a book, it's just like, all right, next page. It's a good cliffhanger for a TV show.
Maybe. I don't know.
Dun dun dun.
Dun, dun. So Murphy's not in a good place, and she's like frozen, shock, terror, and here's where he makes an interesting choice, because he's not snapping her out of it. So he figures he'll do a soul gaze to connect with her. So he braces himself, prepares for it, meets her eyes, and nothing happens. So that was like kind of a ooh moment for us too, because we're like, we didn't know there could be a lights are on, nobody's home moment.
Yeah.
So even though it's very definitely Murphy, and even though she is still alive and whatever, because her mind, brain, emotions, whatever, are dealing with this other horrific whatever, that, he actually can't instigate a soul gaze with her. I'm like, that's an interesting little plot twist. So they still haven't done the gazy.
Well, I thought it was interesting that he decides to risk it with Murphy, even though he didn't with Malone, where he was like, no.
But he said with Malone, he's like, I do not want to know what's happening right now.
Well,
Right?
because he opened the site to take a look, and the site was so bad, he's like, I don't want to look directly on Malone's soul itself. Like, he could already see there was bad shit happening around, right? So, so that isn't, although I guess Malone, I mean, here, he interrupted it happening, because he walked in, again, it was something that was created on this side, because, again, the other one went back into the Never Never and got Malone in his sleep. This is still in the real world, so who knows maybe how that's different from, or maybe it's just because it hasn't been going on long enough, maybe.
Different type of attack this
Because,
time.
because he said Malone had been, like, doing this for hours, and the guy was, like, shredded pretty badly by the time Harry got there, so maybe he's counting on the fact that, not as much trauma has been done, but I don't know. Okay. But doesn't matter, because it doesn't get to happen either.
Right.
So we don't know if this would have caused him. Decides to put her into basically an induced coma. So, because he figures out that she's terrified, and that even though she's not making any sound, it's like the trying to, which I'm like, that's just kind of a creepy hole. It's like, I recognized it for what it was. Murphy was screaming. You're like, oh,
Yeah, no,
I don't
not a fan.
like, no bueno. So So puts her in this, so he's like, I can't snap her out of it, and I don't know if that would be dangerous, but I can lock her down so that the thing can't get at her anymore tonight, and I can make it so that she's not dreaming or anything, so at least hopefully cut her off from
enchanted
whatever,
sleep,
whatever nightmares it's trying to give her. Hopefully we can just wall her away from all of that. So Stallings is in there with him, and is like, what can we do? And he's like, I need Kravos' spell book. And John's like, I can't really just do that. And he's like, but I need it. Like, that's where, like, this was his demon. He's got the names and everything I need to know in that spell book or whatever. And Stallings is like, it's kind of some other shit going on. Like, it's not that easy. And Harry's like, well, you want to fucking help her? This is what I need, right? And basically Stallings is like, there's nothing else we can do. And he's like, I can't, no. Like, you want me to help? You want to get her out of this? That's what I need, right? And so Stallings is like, fuck.
Oh, shit.
So he's still not, and like, I get Stallings. Stallings like, this could cost me my job. And I'm like, I get that. Like, I mean, and it's again, one of those funny things a lot of times in TV, I'm like, everybody just goes down and grabs evidence all the time, willy-nilly, it seems. But again, in the real world, you gotta have a reason for checking that out. And there's that whole, is it chain of evidence? Is that the word I'm looking for, where you all sign off along it? Not chain of command. I know that's not what but like, I think it's chain of evidence or something like that, where everybody, has to make sure, where everything went all along the way, so it doesn't get misplaced or go missing, or, basically he's like, yeah, and I mean, I get it and I don't. Like, Harry makes it sound a little bit like he's like, I need you to steal that book from me. Part of me is like, you were on that case. You were involved in that case. You helped conduct. You think there would also be a way for you to reasonably have access. Like, even if you went in, like, maybe you can't take it out of evidence, but if Stallings walks Harry down there and is like, dude needs to take a look at, like, again, I don't know, well, Harry's only a consultant, right? And maybe that's, but basically, yeah, it's not even just where, he doesn't even make it sound like he's like, hey, could you just grab it for a couple minutes and let me take a look at it? And then he basically makes it sound like he's got to, like, have it. And Stallings like, I can't just give it to you. Like, it's fucking evidence.
Well, and the lead investigator on that case would have been Murphy, who is incapacitated, so.
Yeah, like, it's just all...
Yeah, not even incapacitated in, like, a way. Like, she's at the hospital and, like, everyone knows. Like, you put her in a coma in her office on a floor. Nobody knows that she's incapacitated right now. And you're just like, well, Stallings here to, take it over from Murphy. Like,
Murph just asked me to grab this. Yeah. And, yeah.
Why? Where's Murphy?
Yeah, just tell her to, buzz down and let me know.
Yeah, having a little nap.
She's right. So anyways, he does say, yeah, because then finally he's like, if I can get it, can you help her? And he's like, yeah. And then Rudolph, again, makes you forget a little bit on these introductions to Rudolph. Rudolph is like, if anything happens to her, I'll kill you. And Harry's like, if anything happened to her and it was my fault, like, I think I'd let you, but it's like, you really forget, like, Rudolph can be such a prick that you forget sort of how in it he was, like, how loyal and whatever he was in the beginning, too, when he was...
What do you mean? What's wrong with Rudolph?
Yeah, I know.
What do you mean in the beginning?
Well, because, in Full Moon, he got all, like, scaredy pants about the werewolf and kind of ran away and didn't help.
No, Battleground hasn't happened yet.
In this one, we find out that when they went to get the sorcerer and the demon, Rudolph kind of got all scaredy pants and ran away. So I'm just saying, Rudolph's not the most upstanding member of the team.
And he's kind of a dick.
Yeah, and he's not very nice to Harry, so it kind of gives you that, we don't feel a lot of love and loyalty to Rudolph. And yet here, Rudolph is taking a moment to be like, hey, it's Lieutenant, you better not fuck shit up.
Yeah.
And that's all we know about Rudolph.
I was just thinking how ragged Harry is at the end of this chapter, too. Like, he's just brutal. Where he says, I want to crawl home and drop a sleep spell on myself. I wanted to hide somewhere warm and quiet and just get some rest.
I know.
So poor guy.
That boy wants to throw himself off a bridge. Every book.
Right. Well, again, so they spent the night running around after Agatha Hagglethorn. They get bailed out of jail. I can't remember if he... Oh, yes, he did good, because him and Susan go home, so we got a bit of sleep. But then Michael comes and gets him, like, early the next morning. So he was already, like, beat up and exhausted when he got home. He obviously stayed up and fooled around with Susan for a little bit more before he finally called it quits. Then Michael's there, like, at dawn or before, because he's like, what the fuck are you doing at this hour? And Michael's like, it's time to go to work. And Harry's like, what the fuck? And then he goes, they check out the church, and then he goes and talks to Morty, and then he gets dragged over to Malone's, and then he gets back home and goes out to search for Lydia, and then runs into these vampires and gets, like, so he's already kind of got to be working on tired because he hasn't had a whole big night. Like, he got a few hours sleep, might have been very restful because he probably passed out pretty hard after all of that exertion of all varieties. But now he's been, like, going all day because he's talking about when he goes to get Lydia that he's trying to get there before sundown, right? So he got up, like, at sun up or before. And now, right? And basically, goes, has, like, a mini brawl and then basically gets, like, drugged out of his mind. So he's already kind of loopy and not. He finally goes to get some sleep and then has, like, this horrifying nightmare. And then he's, like, back up and then he's, like, fucking racing over to... So it's like he got, like, I don't know, a couple of hours of, like, drugged out sleep or something like that. And then, didn't even really get to fully enjoy his narcotic experience. Because he's, like, he's battling it at first because he knows it's bad. And then when it finally breaks down, he's like, okay, this feels really good. Oh, horror, trauma... death, carnage, like, just no cool. So, yeah, I bet he probably is looking a little ragged at this point. A little worse for wear. He doesn't even have time to be, like, hungover or come down or whatever, because he's getting thrown into all this shit again. But now he's pissed off. So, he finds enough power to work the spell on Murphy, because he taps into some of that anger and rage that this thing is targeting his friends and targeting them as him. And then, that's basically it. It's the line. So he comes out after he gets Murphy down where he comes out and Rudolph is there and he's like, Stallings is nowhere in evidence. And I'm like, or is he? Maybe that's exactly where Stallings is right now. And then Rudy's all like, you better not be a fake, like, nothing better happen to her. And that's basically where they sign off. He's like, kid, if anything happens to Murphy because of me, I think I'd like you.
So this concludes our episode 8.9, A Dish Served Cold. Thank you for listening. You can find us online at freeflowrambling.com and McAnally's.ca. There we have links to our other podcasts, social media, and other fun tidbits. Please subscribe if you like what you're hearing, and please consider supporting us through Patreon to keep the magic alive and to see more content. We are Free Flow Rambling. Conjure by it at your own risk.